Hey everyone, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you so much for taking time today to join us for our webinar in partnership with Bell Statistics. I'm really excited about today's topic, tactics for faster experimentation. In the past, we've spoken a lot about stats methodologies and more technical experimentation concepts. But really, in order to be able to move faster and run more experiments faster, it's really a set of things you need to do end to end, from planning to implementation to analysis to reporting to decision making. And I'm really excited to have Allon and Kaz, add more, context and share actionable takeaways at every stage of this process to help you take something back and actually improve your experimentation speed and decision making. Uh, as folks trickle in, one thing that I always like to do is ask folks to take a moment to drop on the chat where you're joining us from this morning or evening. So I'm joining from Seattle, Washington, as is Kaz, and Alon is joining us from Tel Aviv. This is a great way to just make sure that the chat is working well for everyone as well. So take a moment to just drop a note. I see already Portland and Ecuador and Denver, Barcelona. It's always so cool to see this. New Jersey. Uh, wow, that's pretty cool. Johannesburg, Berlin, Poland. Alon and I always joke that, I think experimentation really is like a true unifying force in this world. Brings everyone together, I guess. Mexico, even India. Wow, that's awesome. Like it's 9:30 in India. Hamburg, Gdansk in Poland, Amsterdam. Very cool to see. Thank you all for taking the time to do this. This is going to be a good piece of content we have for you. What we'll do is I have a few prepared questions for our panelists. I'll have them introduce themselves in just a moment. Um, and we'll maybe spend about 20-25 minutes sort of going through this end-to-end process of accelerating experimentation. And then I want to set aside maybe 10 to 15 minutes at the end to answer a few questions. So use the webinar chat or the Q&A on the Zoom panel to shoot your questions throughout the webinar. I'll be sure to keep track of that and ask our amazing panelists at the end. But without further ado, Alon, do you want to take a moment and quickly introduce yourself and Bell Statistics?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, you said. Happy to be here again. I'm Allon. I'm a statistician. I'm the founder of Bell Statistics. We are a company based in Tel Aviv, Israel, and we provide services in the experimentation field, A/B testing, geo experiments, and also marketing mix modeling.
Nice. And Kaz, do you want to give a quick intro and also your role at Statsig?
Yeah, I'm Kaz. I'm currently a PM at Statsig on the experimentation platform. Formerly, I worked at Uber for about 10 years. I've had multiple roles there. I started in the operations org. I spent some time as a data scientist doing things like analysis and experimentation, and then I finished my time there as a PM. So kind of wore a couple different hats during my time there.
Amazing. Yeah, we've done obviously folks who have been attending our webinars know Alon pretty well at this point. And Kaz recently joined us a few months ago after over a decade at Uber. So lots of great examples and insights I'm sure we'll have from both our panelists today. All right. So to get started, right, even before we go into, some of the tactical things that we want to talk about today, like, power analysis or automating experimentation calculations, I want to first start at a high level, and maybe Kaz is a good question for you to kick things off. What are sort of some of the key strategic shifts that teams need to make in order to, ship faster and run more experiments faster?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question to kind of set the stage for the discussion today. Um, I think it's pretty common to hear within like the tech world to think about iterate quickly, try small things and kind of work on just like deploying it and see what happens in real life and learn from it and progress. The one thing I think I've heard recently that I've resonated with me in terms of like driving a cultural shift is also thinking about how it's important to focus on learnings instead of getting like a successful result. So when I say successful result is like, hey, I have a new product idea or a new feature idea. I'm gonna launch it. I want that feature or product to be the successful one And I think it's really important to kind of shift your focus on what do I want to learn from this experiment. And the reason why I bring this up is it's really helpful in two ways. One is if the experiment doesn't go well, which it's inevitably going to because you just can't predict the future, it's really helpful to like then focus your time to understand like why didn't it go well, and that learning is going to be very very valuable for both yourself because when you come up with the next iteration, you want to know what didn't go well so you can try to fix it. And when you have a really good grasp of what actually happened, not just that your version succeeded, then you can also share that with your team, and then other folks or even maybe other parts of your product can benefit from it. So that's why I think this concept of focusing on learning is really helpful. The second piece of this is when you do that, it also helps you to think about your hypothesis in more like a scientific way or a way that helps your experimentation. You say, okay, if this happens, I think this is going to happen, and this is what I want to learn. And that really helps you to structure your experiment and kind of makes that entire process of setting up your experiment a lot more smoother. So that's why I kind of want to bring up this concept of really focusing on learning instead of proving that your idea is correct or your idea is wrong.
Yeah, that great points there, Kaz. And Alon, anything you want to add there? Just to like sort of tie it all together?
Yeah, not much. I totally agree about the learning. And I think that many people would probably view, when you think about it naively, experimentation as something that slows you down. And which is true if you look at the immediate alternative of shipping without testing. And if you add learning to that, then for sure, just shipping without testing is the faster way for the immediate alternative as the alternative. But in reality, experimentation is the thing that keeps you from running fast in the wrong direction. So the goal is not just the speed. You want to have confidence that the product you're shipping is actually moving customers and business forward.
Yeah, I'm reminded
Really
of
good
that
point.
poster from those early Facebook days where it was like, don't mistake motion for progress, I think, which was, I think, getting to like, okay, just because you're like doing things doesn't mean you're, headed in the right direction. Um,
Yeah.
so one of the reasons we decided to do this talk today was, to really like move away from just focusing on, like the stats methodologies and, like specific techniques, but really view this as like, an end-to-end sort of, life cycle of an experiment and like doing things at every stage to, be able to accelerate decision-making times. So the first step would obviously be like planning the test, right? You start with like planning your A/B test. Alone, I want you to like, maybe share some of the key things that you speak to with your clients that they need to get right during the planning phase of the test.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And if it's okay, I'll take like several, I think, minutes. I usually talk about it with clients and on workshops that we give. And I think that we're going to talk about in this webinar about planning, analysis, reporting, and cultural things that makes things fast. But I think that the planning phase is crucial. A well-designed test can finish faster and give you clean result. And a poorly designed test can take longer, but not only take longer. I've seen so many tests that were dumped into the garbage because they had some kind of a bug, because the event were not configured correctly, or the KPI were not calculated right, or something like that. So I think that like you want to be able to put a lot of time and thought on the design phase. So that like a general comment about why planning is so crucial. But I want also to give some few simple design choices or few tips that could really make a huge difference, and they do not require any I don't know, advanced statistical rigor or methodology. So it's something that every analyst, data science, even product manager can easily implement in their day-to-day experiment planning. And the first tip I want to talk about is just to do equal allocation, which is for some companies it's the most obvious thing. It's the default choice, but I've seen many companies, many clients that are not choosing the 50%, 50% allocation. It is really important to say that from the statistic point of view, 50-50 is the best. So there's like, you can arguably say that's not always, but almost in all cases, you want to split the traffic 50%, 50%. Now, there are, I guess, two arguments, and those are not statistical argument, those are business argument, why not to do that. The first one is that you want to mitigate risk. So if you're doing something that you are really afraid that is going to ruin the KPI, that might risk your business, I don't know, revenue or something like that, then sometimes product managers or analysts feel that they should not split it equally, maybe 80-20, 90% 10. Now, I have some argument why you should not do that if you're doing sequential testing or others. There's really other way to mitigate the risk, which are not to split the traffic not equal. But I want just to emphasize that I think that the most important thing is that all the stakeholders will understand what is the effect that of the allocation, the way you decide to do allocation on the test duration. And it could get like the difference between 90% to 10% and 50% to 50% could be like 3 times more duration. So it could multiply by 2, 3, 4, even 5, depends what the way you split. So this is like a really easy thing to do. If you could split equally the traffic, do that. The second tip is to test 100% of the population. Sounds funny, sound obvious, but in many cases, people don't do that. I actually encountered several clients that are splitting 50% and 50%, but only 10% of the traffic. Okay, and that does not count to split equal the traffic. You want to be able, if you could test Android and iOS, you want to do that. If you could choose the 100% of the population, you want to do that as well. So that's like a big thing that also could really help. Another thing is that you want to do, but there is compromise here. You want to pick a KPI with higher conversion rate or with smaller variance. So I'll give you
Yeah.
like an example. It's really easy to, when you think about funnel, about onboarding for a specific product or some kind of a flow for registration or for purchase, then it's usually everyone thinks about the funnel. You have the people that enter the homepage, then you have some people that you have like a drop, and then some people, I don't know, enter their email and register, and then you have some people that are interested in the product, maybe start a trial, and then you have some people who purchase. So in most cases, everyone, and which is also fine, they are interested in the revenue or the percentage of people that purchased the product. And that makes sense because you want to be really business oriented and driven by what really matters. I can totally understand that. But we don't want A/B test to be longer than several weeks. I would say that in the vast majority of cases, you want an experiment to be 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, not more than that. Most of them are usually between 1 week to 3, maybe 4. So if you are choosing your KPI, your goal metric to be the percentage of people who purchased, compared to, I don't know, the percentage of people that started the purchase process, if the percentage is twice bigger than the other one, that could have a huge difference in terms of test duration. So
Yeah.
it is a compromise, but it could really make a big difference.
Yeah, if I can add that, I think that point really resonates with me. Is that in Uber, it was definitely the case where a lot of product or new products that we tested, the goal was like, hey, is this adding incremental revenue or incremental profits to the business? But metrics like profits and revenue are super noisy, high variance. Like if you think about, some people take really small trips and some people take really long trips. So it's a metric. If you wanted to measure that within a short period of time, you needed to have a really, really large MDE. But we would often break it down into smaller components, like what is the cancellation rate, or what is like the number of trips that people are taking. Even kind of from there, trying to deduce it's okay. If these metrics are all moving up, they should add up to either like margin and profit improving. So really metric selection, I agree, is like a super important part of planning.
Yeah, it is. I think it's like probably the most important part of the test design from the
Yeah.
analyst perspective. Like being able both to capture the business impact and make sure that the experiments has the ability, the statistical power to detect a change. This is, I think, one of the most challenging part of experimentation in general. Yeah, I'll quickly add the last two. So one which is really similar to what I just mentioned is binarization of the KPI when possible. So usually it will be the percentage of people who purchased compared to the output, the average revenue per user, for example. So if you are testing pricing, then this recommendation does not work because you are interested in the output and the conversion rate could change. But if, for example, you are changing something that should encourage more people to purchase without affecting the prices of the product, then usually it will make sense to check the percentage of people that purchased and not the average revenue per users. The last one will be to do one tail test when possible. There are some disadvantages for that, but it could be really beneficial in some cases. And all the things that I mentioned, those are the simple, easy hacks that everyone can do easily in every test. There are more advanced techniques that I might talk about later, but those are I would say, the easiest and probably with the biggest effect on the experiment design.
Nice.
Yeah, really good point.
Yeah, I think like a lot of important design choices there, and we'll try to summarize maybe some of this and share it out with folks post webinar. But Kaz, do you want to add anything to that, just on the importance of planning?
No, I think just a couple things to add to it is it. I think if you want to speed up experimentation, if you're running, let's just say like a 2 to 4 week experiment, the worst thing you can do is at the end of the experiment, spend another month or another like 2 weeks to until you can actually get a decision and buy-in and like ship the actual variant. And I think how you prevent that like loss of time or waste of time at the end of the experiment is having a lot of good work that goes into like the pre-planning place. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like a huge investment, right? It's like if you do it a little bit at a time, it really goes a long way. And the thing I want to highlight here in terms of planning is like working really closely with your product manager or your engineering leads when the product manager is developing like a PRD doc. I think this is something that we did at Uber, and it's really commonly talked about in other like well-established experimentation companies is start to have that like experimentation document that grows with it's like a living document that grows with the PRD or the ERD document. And as you do it, work with your PM to like give them feedback on the PRD so that they're kind of co-developing. And that way it's not this like one big effort that you have to invest in to get your setup right. And during that process for the folks in the room that might be data scientists, I really encourage to help like the product manager think through, maybe take their idea and help them convert into this like hypothesis or like, hey, what is it that you want to learn? Like, do you just want to launch this product, or like what is the fundamental thing that you're trying to validate with your product launch? And if there's any product folks in the room too, I would kind of like encourage you to think from the opposite end of, okay, this is what I want to launch, but like, what is the learning that I want? And like, what do I want my data scientist or the person setting up the experiment to understand is like the input into their hypothesis. Going through that and then really having a clear hypothesis, then I think makes this process of like selecting the right metrics, and that process could be a trade-off as well, but selecting the right metric becomes a lot easier when you understand the business need and like the hypothesis that's driving this actual work. So those are the couple of things I want to highlight. The one thing is, and this is something I like to talk about a lot too, and like from my personal experience, power analysis is like I think a really important thing to be familiar with and try to do as well. And the reason why I bring this up is it's also really helpful to know maybe when it's a bad time to do an experiment, or when the metrics that you're selecting are the bad, like not the best metric to test on. because if you run the power analysis and it says, well, to get any kind of reasonable signal, you have to run the experiment for 2 months, 3 months, then you might say, okay, we need to rethink how we're going to validate this idea or validate this product. And again, you won't go down this route of running an experiment. It's been running for 2 months, and you're like, do we conclude it? Do we let it keep running? The signal's not clear, but it's also not saying it's bad. So you also want to avoid getting in this like a limbo state of not knowing what to do. So those are the couple things I would add.
Nice. And also plug for Statsig's new refreshed power analysis calculator,
Yeah,
which is now inline in console. I just dropped a link on the chat for folks who want to like check it out, featuring Kaz's demo as well. Um,
yeah,
Power analysis. But yeah, no, I think lot of great points there, and it kind of feels to me like these are all like fairly low hanging fruit that everyone can just, it's sort of like templatize and like do these things. Like it's even before you get to like more advanced things, it feels like, okay, these are some low hanging fruit. Like make sure you have these design choices and trade-offs when planning the test, and that can sort of set you up for success. Um,
yeah. Can I just add one thing?
yeah.
I think it is relatively low hanging, but I think keep in mind, even I think when I was at Uber, these are things that we all had in place as processes, but also things that like people are continuing to trying to be better and better at too. So I think it's like really easy to get started on, but it's also good to know that it's like almost like a lifelong skill. Like breaking down products into hypotheses, like sometimes it's easy, sometimes it can be really hard. Picking the right metric sounds really easy, but it can also be like a process, and it is a skill for people to learn. And I think that that's something to keep in mind too.
Yeah, no, that's a good call out. Yeah. All right. So sort of moving, from the planning stage to like actually like implementing or executing the test. What are some things to keep in mind here to like get teams to, move faster at this stage? And Kaz, I know you had some, talking points here. Uh,
Yeah. I think something to keep in mind here is kind of like leveraging tools and automation. Again, a little bit of a shameless plug. It doesn't have to be us or any platform, but being able to standardize as much of your process really helps. Before Uber, I kind of come from a manufacturing background and supply chain background. And in that, it's really core for like really good, smooth processes to have automation and standardization. And a good example here is like even things like metrics when you're first maybe starting off in a smaller group, it's really easy for a couple people to be in line with like using the same metric, maybe even leveraging the same notebooks to say, okay, this is how we're going to define metrics. But as you grow an organization, or if you maybe have like multiple organizations that kind of touch the same metric, it's really common for folks at the end of the experiment to be like, well, like I don't agree with how you're defining this metric here. And or like somebody said to create a version that's just like slightly different, and then the results could be meaningfully different between the two. So it's really helpful to have these things like standardization so that when you're picking a conversion metric or when you're picking a revenue metric, people are all anchoring on the same piece, and it really avoids any kind of confusion later on. The other thing I would kind of touch on is the lower environments testing and kind of doing a little bit of it potentially if you can do like a gradual rollout. Again, what you really want to avoid is you thought things are going really, really well. 2 to 3 weeks later, you look back and be like, oh, like something wasn't right. There was a bug that we didn't catch. Or maybe like something wasn't fully rolled out to like the treatment group. And as a result, you don't see any variance. Like have seen this so many times, and I'm sure like folks in the room have all at some point in their career encountered these types of issues. So really thinking about the due diligence of when you're implementing it, having some process to test, being able to do some low environment testing and validation, maybe do a little bit of a gradual rollout to make sure that like things look good. Look at your guardrail metrics so that, hey, again, going back to hypothesis, like if things are going well, like I would kind of use it with a personal Uber experience. Like we're running an experiment on like ETAs. If the ETA goes up, we expect cancellations on the rider side and the driver side to behave a certain way. So like we would look at those signals to not kind of make sure that the initial data that's coming in aligns with what we expect to be happening. And those are good ways to kind of validate as you go so that you're not diving into the experiment, finding out that like things aren't set up right.
yeah, like all great points there. I think it's also I think again at the risk of like plugging Statsig. I think we've seen many customers who've, really large enterprises like, think the likes of Atlassian at that scale. It becomes very hard for experimentation teams to like even know how many experiments are currently live and running across the organization and like who's using what methodologies to calculate results and what metrics are being used. And I think, and they've shared this in a talk where, post a year of implementing and modernizing their experimentation, toolkit with Statsig, they were able to, have a clear view of like, oh, these are the set of custom metrics that everybody operates on. These are available to use for every analyst or everyone who's shipping a feature to like attach these to their rollouts. And you have like a sort of it builds trust because you're not, I guess, talking to a different person who has a different, methodology and they have a different sort of result for the same experiment. Um, so it definitely makes a lot of sense to like get those processes and standardization right.
Yeah. I think one other thing I'll add too here is, um, and if these are topics that kind of get brought up by companies like Netflix sometimes, is this idea of like starting to build a little bit of your product so that it can accommodate experimentation relatively easily. For example, like we have a feature called Pram Store where you can kind of configure certain fields within your, say, website or your product that can be kind of swapped out with different values, different inputs. So you can swap it out with an experiment. So that way it's easy for somebody without deploying new code to implement an experiment. These are things that really came up. Like if you have, in the case of Uber, if you have like a product request page, there's a lot of products that show up in that field, and a lot of the other teams will want to run experiments of change modifications to it. So building it in a way where it makes it easy for teams to kind of plug in and run experiments is also kind of a cool idea as well.
Yeah, good call out there. Um, Alon, do you want to add anything there, or do we want to move to maybe like the analysis side of things? Uh,
Yeah, I don't have much experience with implementing our, yeah, I'll be happy to talk about analysis.
Yeah. So okay. So we did planning, implementation. Now the actual analysis of the experiment. Like how do you make that faster and more streamlined, and sort of let I guess the data scientist folks focus on more higher value tasks instead of just the repetitive calculations. Alon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I'll tell you that like when I just started getting into the experimentation field in the digital world, like from university, I was I was very surprised because like when you think about the so-called analysis of an experiment should be like very simple and very quick. You have a very simple statistical test usually, and results are significant or not significant. I know I'm simplifying things, and then you could do lots of other analysis, but I think that what surprised me is that seeing people practice A/B testing or mostly interviewing analysts when we do experimentation audit for companies, you can sometimes hear that in some companies, people could easily invest 80% of their time with analysis of experiments and reporting of A/B tests. Now, that could be a positive signal that it is important, and usually it is in a very data-driven companies, but it's also a signal that something is not working right. You don't want people to, like analysts or data people, to do only or most of their time to do only experimentation or experimentation analysis. I think that speeding up analysis comes down to two pieces that work together. The first one, which is relatively obvious, is that you want the infrastructure that does the heavy lifting. So you want to have strong data pipelines, you want to have fast aggregation, and you want to have a reliable stat engine. And not, for example, what happens in many companies that are not using external tools like Statsig. They could have their scripts that they need to change, or the KPIs that they need to redefine or recalculate and work with SQL script or so. And you wanna pair that with a clear self-service dashboard, so product managers and marketeers can understand result without waiting for an analyst walkthrough. I think that not the intuition, but the natural way of data per people, like analysts or data science with dashboards, is that they want to get to put in dashboards all the data, and then they want to consume it and interpret the results by themselves. So they want to have some part of the analysis done while they're watching the dashboard, which makes sense for the vast majority work or analysis of experimentation of analysis in general. But in experimentation, I think that the goal, the way, what you want to have is fewer, can you help me to interpret this, those type of questions. You want to have what we really try to do, and I think you have that in Statsig as well, is you want to have like a good summary when someone enters the A/B test result, to have like a strong statement if the test is significant, if it is working, what is the MDE, and what is the lift. And you don't want people to do lots of interpretation or analysis while consuming all the data that you have in dashboards. I've seen some dashboard that had like lots of just data in it, and it was really hard to understand what is happening with the test. Now, a second thing that you want to pair with it is the cultural shift in how to respond to results. So team and mostly data people love to deep dive into tests, mostly losing tests. So if the test is winning, we usually all celebrate, not all the time, but most of the time we just celebrate. But when you have a losing test, suddenly everyone is slicing every segment, trying to resurrect the feature by finding one tiny group where it maybe worked. Now, it is emotionally understandable, but it burns time with almost no business value. And actually, you could solve this with automation. So you could, for example, there are many methods and tools that can proactively surface interesting segment without manual slicing. That's nice, but it's not. I think that in this specific case, it's not about automation. Like you really, what you want to do is to help people understand that sometimes the fastest path forward is just to accept the result, to move on and to run or the next experiment or the next iteration. So, and I think that the thing that I try to say most to people that are trying to slice and dice the experiment and to find some kind of a segment where maybe the feature had a positive impact, besides the problem of multiple hypotheses and inflating the type 1 error rate, the false positive rate, is that you want it to be business actionability. You want to have actionability. And if you are to find like a small segment where maybe perhaps the feature was positive impacting, usually you're not going to release it only to that specific segment, because that like a really disaster in terms of, I don't know, of the product, the structure, or everything. So if the analysis is not related to an actionable action that you could do, then in many cases it's just a waste of time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's all some lot of good points there, Alone. I see a lot of questions from folks on like, the stats stuff like, sequential testing and Cupid. And so I definitely want to make sure we get to that in our next part. But I want to give Kaz you the quick opportunity if there was anything you wanted to add on just like, the automation of results and the
Yeah.
analysis side.
Yeah, I think the value to think about here is just if you having a platform is really good in that sense, whether it be home built or purchased off the shelf. The thing that I always kind of think about is as a data scientist, I didn't it wasn't my favorite thing to get bugged by like PMs or somebody else about like specific cuts of data and like this and that and kind of having to go down to answer all these one-off questions. And having been a PM, I also hate going to ask people for like little different slices of data. So having a way to be able to like self-service that really feels good for me because I can be like, okay, how do I do it? Then I can do it myself. Once I do it, I'll probably have like a set of questions to be like, am I interpreting things correctly? And I'll have a chance to kind of like talk through my observations, but that way it really helps to kind of like let the data scientist or the experimenter really focus on kind of the more technical or like harder things. So I think that's something that I think is really valuable.
Totally makes sense. Okay, so we had a lot of questions already coming in on the chat, so maybe hopefully we'll get to answer some of that in the next, part of this talk on focusing on, the statistical methodologies and testing techniques that can accelerate experimentation runtimes. Alon, do you want to maybe go first? I know you talk a lot about, the essential techniques that every team should have in their toolkit. Do you want to maybe quickly cover what some of these techniques are and why it's important?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to quickly talk about each one, and then if in the Q&A if people would like me to elaborate, then I'll happily do so. So I think that the first advanced tool that you could use is sequential testing. Basically, when you do just a simple t-test or z-test or chi-square test or whatever, um, you're supposed to have a fixed sample size. You're not supposed to analyze the data until you reach the predefined sample size. It's not practical and in the digital environment because people could get access to the data on a daily basis, even on an hourly basis. But sequential testing provides you the framework that allows you to pick at the data and to stop the moment that you have enough evidence to stop the experiment if it is really succeeding, or that if it does not have any chance to succeed. In practice, sequential tests can, well, like the publication of sequential tests will say that it is could save you reduced duration between 20% to 80%. I would say that like it is by roughly 50% on average. So it is a very, very strong, and I think in general that the default should be to run a sequential test unless you have a good reason why not to do so. The second method is Cupid. Cupid is it just using pre-existing data when you do an experiment. So it is really, really, really impactful when you're testing existing users because usually you have lots of historical data, pre-existing data about them, and this could reduce noise significantly. So what usually it could, I don't know, get to roughly the same number as sequential tests, like reducing by 50%. But I've seen a case with one of our clients that it reduced by 80% or even 90% the test duration. So it could have a huge impact. And the good news is that you can do both sequential testing and Cupid together. So it's not one or the other. You can actually do both. And then you can make your experiment faster by 4 times, maybe even 3, 4 times than just having a naive t-test or z-test. Two more advanced method is how outlier handling. So outliers could really, they really inflate the variance of the KPI of the population. And then it is really hard to get to see results. So you can use usually the most popular technique is Windsorization. I'm not familiar with any product company or someone who's doing something else. And that could it could also really help with the test duration or with the statistical power. It is important to say that it is also a bit risky because sometimes the effect is on the outlier. So if you are using outlier handling, you want to be cautious when you do that and to make sure that you are not that you are improving the statistical power, the sensitivity of the test, and not reducing it. And the last thing, which is not making a specific test faster, and we also discussed about it, I think, several times in previous webinars, is that you want to run tests in parallel. So if you run tests in parallel, each test is not going to be faster, but if you have experiments that are sitting in a queue waiting for the turn, the fastest one is simply running more than of them at once.
Yeah, all great points there. And I think, like Alon said, like, we've covered some of these in other webinars in more details. But if, folks have any questions, like I'll share you some resources at the end of the talk. But Kaz, anything you want to add there in terms of maybe like also as the PM on the experimentation team, like how Statsig is thinking about this? Um, and then we can move on to
Uh,
the final part.
No, I think these are challenges a lot of customers are always curious about, especially kind of those that might have naturally harder time getting sample size. So companies that maybe work for more like B2B clients just innately have more restraint constraints on how they can run experiments. In those examples, like we really talk about winterization being an important one where you could have like one client or one account that is just like a huge whale that just moves the metric entirely by just them being in one group. So it's really important to kind of, I think winterization is a really important topic there. Cupid, we also have concepts around Cupid where you can actually define covariates. So you can just, for in the case of Cupid, you can just look at the pre-existing bias between the two groups, but you can also introduce different covariates to track and based on those make adjustments as well. I think in the industry we call it, for us we call it Cure. Some people would call it like Cupid Plus. And the other one, kind of building on the sequential testing. We just recently introduced this concept, experimentation type called SPRT, which is a super interesting one too, where it kind of looks at the probability of something happening in the past and then comparing that to what you're observing in the experiment duration. So you're kind of looking at the ratio of likelihoods of your null hypothesis being true or your alternate hypothesis being true. And it's a really cool experimentation methodology because kind of to Alon's point, if there's very early signal that nothing is changing, then you can kind of quickly make that call that there's no change. And eventually kind of with time, like you always get an answer. So that's a really, really cool, interesting methodology that's coming out as well.
Very cool. Yeah, I know a lot of work has been done, and we've shipped a lot of enhancements in that area this year.
Yeah.
I see a lot of questions from the audience, so I want to be able to keep, maybe 10 minutes to, to answer them, but maybe we have like the final step of it, right? Like we've spoken about planning, implementation, the analysis and automating analysis and the stats methodologies. But maybe we can quickly touch upon the final step of like, the actual reporting and the decision making and how, you can streamline things and make things faster there. Alon, do you want to maybe share a few things and then Kaz can wrap things up?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to do that quick as well. So in terms of reporting and decision making, I think there are three things that could really help. The first one is clear and self-serve reporting. I think I already taught that point, so I'm not going to elaborate any further. A second thing that I think really helps is to push decision closer to the teams. I've seen, I don't know, a variety of companies. Some people have like a really high level stakeholder that is making the decisions or is involved in every test. And in some cases, you have lots of power giving to the team or the product manager within the team. So when you push these decisions closer to the team, usually I think things get much faster. There's people are more connected to the product, to the change. You have also less, I think, internal politics, organization politics when it comes to closer to the team. And I think this, like, I think could really help. And another thing that could super help, it is also related to planning, is to decide the thresholds upfront. So I've seen cases when people just released a feature or a test, and they're like, their thought was, let's release it, let's look at the data, and then make a decision. And then there's like lots of room for interpretation, for argument, for conversation, if the test was positive or not. Usually, like the last example that I can think of was that there was some kind of change in price. And then usually when you change the price, conversion rate change for purchase, the revenue, like the output changes. And it's not always clear, not for everyone, that you want to choose the variant that had a higher statistical significant output, because sometimes you just want to have lots of people or many customers. So not stating upfront what would be the decision, what would be the threshold, could sometimes really make the analysis much longer and debatable and maybe even frustrating.
Kaz, anything to add that
Yeah.
to
I mean, I think totally plus one. I think the most frustrating experiences I've had as both like a data scientist and like a PM, or sometimes afterwards, like just products linger, is not having a really good decision criteria upfront when you set up the experiment. Like very, very important. It really helps to. My point here is if you do kind of all the little steps beforehand, this step should, in theory, just like kind of go smoothly. And it really depends on how much effort that you kind of put in upfront. The decision criteria is a good one, and kind of to add a meta point, it's really how well can you kind of bring everybody, all the stakeholders along during your setup and the setup process of like explaining people what you're trying to learn, how you're going to do it, and making sure that people are up to date in that process so that they're not surprised by what you actually did and executed on. And I think one kind of thing I always take back from like a data science perspective is helping to create like a concise story of what happened. I think it's really easy, especially for like data science and like data people who love data. It's like you want to show the whole thing of like all the interesting things that you were able to observe and like how you got to the conclusion. But when you want to kind of accelerate the decision making process, it's really good to take the bits of data that helps you tell your story. And sometimes this might feel uncomfortable because you might feel like you're hiding bits of information, but if your intention is to like tell a good tell a clear story and tell the truth, like it's okay in my mind to like pick the right pieces of data that help explain that story. Some of the people in the room don't need to probably know all the details of it, and it's like hard to like suppress those, but really thinking about how do you tell a concise story and only surfacing the data points that help you tell that story, I think is an important thing. It's an important skill and something to think about for folks in the room.
Yeah, great point there. And I think it's been a lot of information, a lot of great points, just end to end how we can, improve processes and like, accelerate decision making, iterate faster, get early signal. So I'm sure like hopefully folks had at least one or two tactics that they feel like they can take back and like sort of like build into their experimentation program today. Okay, so I know we are like sort of at time with, with the content, but I want to, maybe just because we have so many questions, like maybe spend a few minutes going over a few of that. So what I'm going to do, guys, is just, put the question out there and then, Alone, you or Kaz can decide who wants to take it. And answer it. So, one question that was interesting, and this kind of goes back to the earlier part of the talk when we were, speaking about traffic allocations and or traffic splits. And so the question from Idan is on, let's say, for mobile app companies, you have iOS and Android teams, and they're not working on the same items at the same time, meaning we finish working on the platforms in at different times. Should we wait for both teams to finish a feature and only then test both of them together? Um, and maybe Kaz, I feel like you may have come
Yeah.
across some of this at Uber.
Yeah, I think this is a really good question. It's my answer is it depends probably. Um, in one way, it's really beneficial. At least in my personal experiences, it's historically easier to launch things and build things on Android. So it's good potentially if you want to get that like initial signal on something, it might be easier to just iterate and test ideas on the Android side and then make sure that you test in iOS. Couple of things that I would kind of bring up is like it's really that balance of like how quickly do you want to move on something? Like what does your resourcing look like? And so maybe you do want to chunk up the pieces on co-developing. The other thing is to keep in mind is like sometimes your demographic of between the two products are completely different. So that's also something to keep in mind as well. It's like you might be able to learn quickly, you might be able to iterate quickly on one side first, but I think it's really still it's be cautious about how you translate that learning to the iOS side. So if you take it from Android, be careful of translating all of it to the iOS side because there's clear the demographic differences between the two platforms. So that's something to really think about.
Nice. Great question. Alon, the next one I think is for you. I think you'll really love this topic of peeking at results. And so Allison's question is on how do you prevent your stakeholders from peeking at results until the experiment is static? Our PMs set up the experiments, but they tend to start taking meaning from early results and spreading that narrative before results are Statsig. And Allison says, I'm the product analyst, but I have 5 PMs, so I can't chase them all down.
Well, I totally get that. I see it all the time, and I will tell you, you cannot prevent the PMs or the stakeholder from picking up the results, and you don't want to do that. So eventually, what you want to do is to implement sequential testing by using Statsig or by, I don't know, implementing it internally. You want to do that because it's really hard to avoid people to pick at the results, and we don't want to do that because we have a solution for picking at the results, and it's using sequential testing. If you are not using sequential testing, if it's really hard for you to implement that and you want to have just a quick solution, what I told some clients that could do is just to change the alpha, the type 1 error, when just to really lower it down when you are running the test and then get it to the 5%, usually 5% at the end of the test. And though in this case, result will not be statistical significant unless they are really extreme. So that could be like a nice hack. You could even do it in every dashboard, every script. It's really easy if you have the sample size and the amount of population within the test. That should solve the problem.
Yeah.
Can I add one quick
Of
thing
course. Yeah.
here too, Allison? Is like this is near and dear to my heart because I feel like we hear this from a lot of customers in terms of like how do you prevent the PM from doing the wrong thing with the data thing? Totally relevant, and I think PMs can be very eager to make decisions. One thing is try to maybe, if it is possible, to like do some kind of training. What I think, having been in operations and one to data scientists and being all these different roles, it's people's comprehensions of like experimentation, how what they think of what actually goes into it can be very varying. Like some people just think it's about creating two groups, finding the difference between the means, and like you call it a day. Like some people don't understand the risks of like false positives, false negatives, all these things that you're trying to avoid, and like how you're trying to get to kind of like the truth. And helping to explain some of the fundamentals there can really probably go a long way and be like, hey, you could be seeing something, but it might not be what you think you're seeing. Try to explain that is really helpful context.
Yeah, totally. Let's maybe try to get to a couple more questions before we wrap up. This one's an interesting one from Antoine, who asks on the 50-50 split, and I think at the start of the webinar we spoke a lot about traffic allocation. What if the treatment is a machine learning model with online training, like a bandit? Would you then like to allocate more data to the treatment group for fine tuning? Is that something um, that either of you have encountered? It's also
I
like,
would, yeah, I'm just not sure if the question is if the experiment is done like a multi-arm bandit or if the treatment is the multi-arm bandit. I could answer the former one if that helps. Yeah, I would say that like multi-arm bandit is something which is um, you should do really cautiously when you do that because the KPI they rely on times. You have like time sensitivity regarding weekend and middle of the week. I would usually recommend people not to dynamically change allocation unless like in a really very specific situation, like I don't know, marketing ads where you have in Google Ads or Meta Ads. And there are also other use cases, but in general, in most cases, I would not dynamically change the traffic allocation, even though it is theoretically more efficient.
I think the other thing that I've had a couple conversations with customers on this topic too is you want to be thoughtful of what you train your data on as well. Like if you're kind of just training on the model's own data, like usually I think you would kind of train the ML model first, do the fine tuning, and then launch it in production and see how it performs. And that way you kind of get an apples to apples comparison of what the model's doing versus what like the long-term data affected by the model is also doing. So I think it's important to kind of think about those aspects as well.
yeah, makes sense. And folks who, if you have any follow-ups, I think I'll just point you to our Slack community, which is statsig.com/Slack. Just dropped it on the webinar chat. That's the best way to, directly reach out to Allon or Kaz. Maybe I'll also, before we wrap up, drop their LinkedIn's as well. So, definitely like continue the conversation. Like both Kaz and Allon are like stats nerds. So like you can totally, reach out to them with more questions. Maybe we'll take like, I like this one question, which, we speak about seasonality effects in other webinars. I saw one from Anusua who had a question on this. Let me just pull that out. So the question was around like what should the minimum runtime be when using sequential testing techniques so that the seasonality effects can be ruled out, or maybe more broadly like how would you handle things like seasonality when you're trying to like run experiments faster?
Yeah, so so it really depends on the sequential testing method. So sequential testing is like a broad name for many methods that you can do. You can do sequential testing in several ways. In some of them, you need to predefine the sample size, and the other you do not. And in most sequential testing methods, which are not multi-arm bandits, allocation is not dynamic. So if it's not dynamic, seasonality is not affecting the I would say the validity of the results. So the results are valid if they are significant. The only thing that could be an issue is that the test was conducted in a specific period of time. Could be high season, low season, and then it's hard to generalize the results to all time period. But this is true not only in sequential testing, this is true in general. It is an issue, and I don't know, there are ways to address it, but it's not something which is special for sequential testing.
Yeah, I think a couple other topics around seasonality was if you got like different results in different times of the year. I think a couple things, just kind of reaching back to Uber examples, there are just certain time periods we just absolutely avoided running experiments on. Those are just like simple things to be cautious of. The other thing is I would also kind of really dig into the kind of going back to the anchoring on the hypothesis, what do you think is actually happening? And then when you do the deep dive analysis, looking at the guardrail metrics or like the second level metrics and seeing how they're moving, because maybe in aggregate, the results are different based on seasons, but you'd probably see at like a level deeper how user behavior might be different. So I would kind of suggest kind of thinking at the next level deeper and kind of looking at how user behavior is changing between the seasons to validate if seasonality is playing an effect or not.
Great points there. I think we're at time. It's been a packed, you know, session with so many great talking points. I love all the questions. Like, just, shout out to all the attendees for also sharing just their experiences. I saw a lot of great, discussions around just like what they're doing in their companies, and like, it sounds like also like very relatable set of, uh, you know, things that different teams are working out. So thank you all for like sharing that. And I've dropped our Slack community as well as Allon and Kaz's LinkedIn profile. So definitely, connect with them through either of these, channels, and just DM them any follow-up questions that you have. We will be sending the webinar recording in a few days, so you can sort of review the material as well. And then maybe later next month, we'll try to like condense some of this content and like publish it as a blog, or as a sort of a ebook or a small guide that folks can reference as well. Um, but yeah, great content, guys. Thank you so much, Alon and Kaz, for sharing all your great insights and examples. Any final thoughts before we drop off? Any hot takes?
Well,
Hot takes.
no, I think it was a pleasure.
Yeah. I think don't be scared of failed experiments. I think failed experiments are those where you didn't get to learn anything. And so I think that's the thing that you always want to that should be like the minimum bar that you're trying to avoid or reach.
Yeah, that's well said. Thanks so much, guys. Thank you all for joining us. Hope to see you all soon for our next webinar. Stay tuned and bye for now.